worked as a land girl during the war.
All thanks and honour to the land girls.
I was a dairy cattle woman. I had 30 dairy cows. I think it's how you treat animals.
She actually reminds me a little bit of my mother.
Hello, I'm Sophia Jessica, and welcome to the Fan Carpet.
My name's Sarah.
Okay, Sarah.
All right. So it's great to hear that you've had a good day and a good week, and it's good to see that you've been keeping well, especially during the current circumstances going on in the world right now.
Yes.
It's not been great, has it?
No.
As I press on, I'd just like to say that I watched your documentary yesterday. It was quite breathtaking and quite insightful, to say the least. I had quite a lot of questions by the end of it, really. Yeah. My first question that came to mind as soon as it started was how did you feel Trump was as a person when you met him, really? Because I was quite shocked to see that you had met him in person, because I was just expecting a documentary surrounding how he is and how the documentary progressed. I wasn't expecting to actually see that you had met him, so I was just wondering how it was meeting him and interviewing him, really, and how he came across as Donald Trump, really.
Well, he's very charming when you first meet him, when he comes into the room. I mean, he had made it clear right up to the day before the interview that he wanted full editorial control, which, of course, no filmmaker or journalist is ever going to give to Donald Trump. So in many respects, I was expecting the interview may or may not go ahead because of that reason. But then on the day of the interview, we went into Trump Tower, we showed him through a back entrance and set up the cameras, and then had to dismantle them again because they weren't the right side. They weren't set up for the right side of Mr. Trump, apparently. But he walked into the room, and he was perfectly charming when he arrived. I think the thing is that once he was challenged, once there are questions that he doesn't particularly like, the attitude, the atmosphere changes, and you see this in the White House, of course, at these press briefings. You know, he'll talk to Fox correspondents and say that was a great question, lovely question. But as soon as it's one from another outlet like CNN or the New York Times, he can take exception to it because they're often asking challenging questions. And Mr. Trump doesn't like to be challenged on things that he says are a great success when the facts speak otherwise. And that's certainly the case with his golf course. So I think during the time of the interview, it changed really the atmosphere. It started very cordially, and then he becomes more and more frustrated really as it goes on. But the interview itself was really filmed for a documentary I made in 2014 called A Dangerous Game, which was a direct follow-up to You've Been Trumped. And then this film, You've Been Trumped 2, was made in 2016, just ahead of the US election, because I was in Flint, Michigan, making a film about the water disaster there, and heard that Molly Forbes, the elderly lady who Mr. Trump says reminds him of his own mother, was still without a working water supply. And that was a story that first emerged in You've Been Trumped, which was made in 2011.
Right, okay, yeah, because I saw the issues that conflicted between Trump and his organisation and against Molly, and how towards the end they did end up having to fix the piping issue, but they had to do it themselves. So I did find the conflict quite, what's the word? It was quite unsettling, to say the least, because of the fact that he describes at the beginning of the documentary how he loves his mum, and how his mum would say everything he's done she would be proud of. But in my own opinion, by watching it, I would say if Trump's mum saw what he had done to Molly in Scotland, I don't think she would be proud of him for doing that. But again, I don't know. I don't know the background of his family, etc. But it's difficult to say, isn't it?
Well, I think, he says that Molly reminds him of his own mother, who hailed from the Western Isles of Scotland. And Molly says, doesn't she, well, he hasn't got a very good way of treating her then. And he also she says in the film that he is a child who's never grown up. And I like to think that Molly Forbes has a huge insight, really, and wisdom about her. I mean, she is now 96 years old. I mean, the film was made 4 years ago, but she's in good health, I'm pleased to report. She doesn't actually live where she lived then. She's now in a home, but she's in good health. And she is a very insightful woman. And when she has been through what she had been through, certainly over those years, living next to Donald Trump and the golf course that he was building, and having gone through so much. I mean, in the first film, people may remember when it was out and broadcast some time ago now, 2012, and we used some of that footage in this film as well. But how he built huge banks of earth next to people's houses, a bit like a kind of early version of the Mexico Wall, if you will. And he really made their lives a misery, and it's not too over-egging it at all to say that. I mean, it was certainly the case that Molly and Michael Forbes and other residents, such as Susan Monroe and David Milne, were living their lives perfectly happily. And then Donald Trump came along. He asked to buy their houses because he didn't like the look of them, and said that they would infringe on what he was trying to do with his golf course resort. They refused to sell to him, and then they were threatened with compulsory purchase orders. So they had this threat of their homes being compulsorily purchased for a golf resort that they didn't believe in, because they felt that the sand dunes where the golf course was going to be built should be protected. Indeed, they were a protected site. But the Scottish government was wooed by Mr. Trump's promises of 6,000 jobs, $1.5 billion of investment in a luxury hotel. None of those things materialized. And so they had gone through all of this bullying and harassment over a long period of time for no economic gain. And that was the promise that Mr. Trump had made when he first bought the land and said he was going to build the greatest golf course in the world.
Which never happened.
No, I mean, the golf course is there, but it's lost millions of pounds since it was built, and that's figures from Companies House, which anybody can look at. And it attracts some people who will go and play golf there, but there's not the huge development of a luxury hotel and all of the things that were supposed to bring the economic prosperity to the area. And indeed, the tragedy of the whole thing is that the land that was destroyed for the golf courses has been destroyed forever. For future generations, it will never be the wilderness it was, because it's now a pristine golf course treated daily by toxic chemicals, and it's not ever going to be what it was. And there's also a threat hanging over not only the residents, but also other land nearby, because the Trump organization wants to build a second golf course on land right next to it. So even though there is a huge opposition locally to that plan, and who knows what will happen post the COVID-19 crisis, whether that will ever happen, but certainly going into this, that was their plan for this year. They were going to start work on a second golf course.
Do you think that'll ever happen, or do you think that will fall through as it did on the first situation?
I think it's unlikely at the moment, just given the economic times that we're all in. But who knows? And I think that's the worry that kind of constantly hangs over the residents. They never really know what's going to happen next. That although, as I say, the golf courses everywhere are struggling, it would seem. I mean, Scotland was stuff full of golf courses, which made it seem surprising in 2010 that Mr. Trump was given the permission for this golf course. But I think the threat is always there, and there's always this concern that lessons haven't been learned. I mean, in the first film, people may remember, after first discovering that Molly Forbes' water had been cut off, I went to interview somebody from the Trump organization, and me and my colleague were arrested forcibly and thrown in jail. And there was a big backlash after that, and the National Union of Journalists took up the case and supported us. The police eventually issued an apology after a whitewash internal inquiry, but lessons weren't really learned from that incident, because there's a local woman, Rowan Betts, who was again had the police come knocking on her door at the behest of the Trump organization, who took exception to her, on the dunes, and so it's an appalling situation, really. That things don't seem to ever really. There never seems to be any sense of closure for the residents. They live with this threat constantly of further either building or further harassment. So it's still within the air, even though things may have been quieter with Donald Trump in the White House.
Oh, it's awful, isn't it? In terms of the documentary and watching it, I'm also quite intrigued to wonder how you decided on tackling a particular subject in terms of Trump and the water issue, and trying to find someone who's been on the bottom end of Trump's conflict with the golf course being built. So I'd quite like to know how you decided on tackling that in the first place, and what you expect from the response when it gets released next week.
Well, I live quite close to where the golf course plan was hatched. So as a filmmaker, journalist living locally, I felt a sense of certainly duty to one degree, because the local press were at the time reporting this was going to be a terrific thing for the area, but I didn't really feel that the local residents' voices were being listened to. And so that's why I set out to first make the film. And it was really from that day on that my life changed, really, because the story has been the focus of 3 films I've made, but the most recent one, which I've just finished, is the Flint film, which has taken 5 years to complete, and we hope to get that released after the coronavirus situation allows us to. But it's certainly been a theme in a way, I suppose. This whole water theme has run through these films, in that first of all it's the Forbes' water supply, and then I'm in Flint, Michigan, where there's the horrendous disaster and the people are grappling with that. And then I find that Molly and Michael Forbes back in 2016 still didn't have a proper working water supply, despite all the promises that they would get the greatest system they'd ever had. So I suppose it's a question really of being close to where it was happening and wanting to get to the truth of the matter, and feeling that it was an important story to try and follow, and things seem to lead into the next project. For example, A Dangerous Game, showing Eugene Trump and Dubrovnik, and that film is in part about a development planned to overlook Dubrovnik, which people will know from Game of Thrones. Above Dubrovnik is this wild land, and this billionaire, not Donald Trump, but a similar kind of plan, wanted to build a big golf resort in the middle of a very parched part of the country. And so there was no water there either. So that was a focus really of that film, but also continuing on the story of the local residents in Scotland as their battles continued too.
Okay, great. That's given me a great response to that question, so thank you for that. In terms of the original release of You Being Trumped, because that was pushed back due to Trump refusing or trying to stop the initial release, and then when you went to try and release it in 2016, he stopped it due to the presidential elections. How did you feel about having it pushed back further to where you are now allowed to release it due to proving that the documentary was created under correct legal grounds? Because I've read up about this, and also Trump still tried to push back and tried to prevent this being released. How did you feel about all of that when he was successful the first time round, but not this time?
Well, I mean, with You Being Trump, the first film, he attempted to get the BBC not to show that. So his lawyers swung into action at the 11th hour and failed. That was in 2012. And then 2016, ahead of the election, when this film was about to come out, some of the press in Britain were reporting on the film, and the Trump organization, Trump International, issued a legal threat saying that anybody who repeated the allegations in the film would face legal action from the Trump organization and Trump International. So what that meant was that we were unable to get what's called errors and omissions insurance, which is the insurance most filmmakers, or all filmmakers, will get for their films ahead of a release, which is a protection for the filmmakers and for the people in the film. And it's also something that's a legal requirement by broadcasters. But because our film featured Donald Trump, the quotes we were given for this insurance were eye-watering and were impossible for us to meet. And so the distributor at the time pulled the film from all the cinemas in the States that it was supposed to be playing in. And so we were left with just one cinema. And we also had a release planned on Now This, which is a channel in the United States. That also was cancelled because of this legal threat. And so we were only able to do one screening, really, which was on Facebook Live as a live streaming event, as a one-off, which meant that the film didn't reach that many people. And the bottom line is that we haven't been able to release it because of that, not being able to get errors and omissions insurance. But that is now behind us because we've got it, and we found a distributor who would release the film, Journeyman Pictures, who are going to release it on the 18th. And so it means that we can have it on digital platforms like iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, and Journeyman VOD, and others as well. So hopefully it'll just mean more people have a chance to see it. And it's really a question of people having the opportunity to make up their own minds, really, of watching the film and deciding what they think of it or what they think of Donald Trump, having more facts at their fingertips. Because I think going into an election, even though this is an older story, because obviously we weren't able to get it out first time around, it's still a relevant story and has a relevance, I think, because of Mr. Trump running once again for the most powerful job in the world.
That follows on to my next question that you briefly answered there, so thank you for that. The next question I was going to ask was, what do you want people to gain from watching this documentary when it gets released next week? And what are you hoping to achieve from the worldwide release of this? Because I'm also aware this is being released nearly 3 months before the US elections get underway. So I was just wondering what you anticipated from the release of this, and what you think it will impact on Donald Trump's side of things. Do you think it will impact him negatively, or do you think it will help him gain more votes?
Well, it's impossible to tell, really, the answer to that. I mean, I think the main thing, though, is giving people all the facts at their fingertips that enable them to make up their own minds. I mean, the film is really a story of an elderly lady who Mr. Trump reminds him of his mother, and the background really of the story in Scotland, which is in a way a microcosm of what has happened on a worldwide stage. I mean, and also I think it's a story about trust in the media, and it's important that for freedom of speech that we are able to get films like this out to an audience. It's not for organizations like Trump International to issue legal threats or Donald Trump just because they don't necessarily like what is in the film. I mean, we've seen this recently with Mary Trump, his niece, and the threats to her, and also John Bolton, his former security advisor, legal threats to him over their books. And it seems that any publication or film that Mr. Trump takes exception to is threatened with a lawsuit. And that doesn't seem to me to be the right way for us to embrace media in the world. You know, we need all points of view, and those points of view may differ, but they need to be discussed. I mean, Donald Trump has made a big thing about the fake news media, and it's usually organizations or outlets that he doesn't like, and he will bully and harass people or journalists or reporters or individuals on social media without a second thought. And he's done it to me, he's done it to countless other people. But I think the main thing is that we just stand firm, try and get our films or our stories out there, and allow people to make up their own minds about what they think of it.
Right, thank you for that. Also, what was the most difficult part of the whole production?
Well, one challenge with it really was it was made in such a short period of time. I mean, I only decided to start it in May of 2016 and finished in October of that year, so which is an incredibly short period of time to make a feature documentary. But I felt like I had to do something. It was I was in a bit of a dilemma at the time, because I was in Flint, as I say, making the film about the water disaster. But I also felt it was important to do a follow-up film that was out on Donald Trump's development in Scotland ahead of the election. And so, on one hand, I wanted to continue doing the Flint film. On the other hand, I felt like it was important to do this. So there was very little time to make it. And we did a Kickstarter, raised, I think, £75,000 or so on that for the production, and we got support from Screen Scotland and Northern Ireland Screen, so it was always going to be very, very tight and a challenge. But I think you just have to go with what you believe at the time, and at the time I felt that this was an important thing to do and an important document. So it hasn't been altered in any way since then. We haven't changed the film, we haven't added anything to it. It's exactly the same film that was made. So it's a document of its time, and people can judge it for that and make of it what they will. But it's certainly, I think, something which has, as I say, a relevance today. And I suppose the biggest challenge then really was the time it took, and then also the difficulties of getting it out there. And that's where that's the position we're in now, where we're finally, after all this time, able to get it out to an audience.
Do you think if you had more time to create the film, do you think you would have been able to grab more content in terms of the side with Donald Trump and in America, or do you think it would have been roughly the same as what has been released and pieced together?
Well, I think the more time you have, the more material you gather, obviously. So you don't have the luxury of time, and you have to just go with what you get. And that's really the difficulties or the challenges you're faced with at the moment. And I mean, I think the main thing is that you could always say, well, if I could live my time again, I might have gone and done that, or I might have gone to that press conference, or said something differently then, or changed it. But that's the difficulties that you face, and I think the main thing is that it was completed, and I think most filmmakers would recognise that that's sometimes the hardest thing with making films, is just getting it done and getting it out there. Otherwise, these projects can just take on a life of their own and never get completed. So it's good to have deadlines, but it was certainly challenging to get it out ahead of the election. And but I still feel it was the right thing to do. It's hard when you're in a situation when you're watching Donald Trump running for the White House, and you know that there is this backstory that isn't really being talked about, or the story that isn't being told, and it's an important part of the picture. And that piece of the puzzle, if you will, is something that I think this film does. It just adds that extra part of Mr. Trump's background, about what he did before he became president, and how he treated people in Scotland, and people can then make up their minds for themselves about it.
Okay, great. That's really good. Thank you for answering that. The last question before I go on to more not so intense questions to do with the documentary, and to not get too political either, but because this documentary is based on a political leader, do you follow what's going on with American politics at the moment? And if so, who do you believe will be the next president?
Well, I've been following it, obviously, and I think that the track record of Mr. Trump over the last 4 years has been a pretty tragic one to watch in many respects. It's not necessarily unexpected, because I think, having seen what happened in Scotland, I think it was almost as Molly Forbes points out at the beginning of the film. She predicts, doesn't she, that there'll be a war if Mr. Trump becomes president. That hasn't happened. But we've seen an awful lot else has happened. And I think the way that he has behaved in that position of power has been a wake-up call for the world, really. Now, I don't like to predict who's going to win, because I don't really feel as a journalist or filmmaker it's my position to make those kind of predictions. But I do think that it would be extraordinary to have another 4 years of Mr. Trump in the White House against the backdrop of this pandemic, which has been ripping through the United States and across the world. But his response to it, has been truly shocking, I think, for lots of people. Whether it's encouraging people to take disinfectant to ward it off, or whatever it is, every time he stands at that podium and says something like that, there's an air of disbelief. As journalists, I think, in the room will say, you can't believe that he's gone one step further and said something so outlandish and outrageous at a time when America needs true leadership, true stewardship through this terrible, terrible situation that everybody's grappling with. And so to have somebody in power who is not up to that challenge is truly disheartening, I think, for people around the world to witness. And so I think time will tell, but I do believe that it's got to be the most important election in history, really, because of the stakes being quite as high as they are.
I agree. I'm going to be quite shocked if he ends up with another 4 years, to be honest. With the way he's been leader the last 4 years, I'd be very shocked. Moving on from the documentary now then, and on to a few lighter questions. I'm near the end as well, so I'm That's okay. You're a director and a cinematographer. Are there any aspects of the film industry which you would like to pursue in the future? Any particular genres or anyone you'd love to work with?
Well, I think one thing I would like to do is I still feel there is a drama to be made on the Trump story. And although I've been making films on other subjects, most recently I'm just finishing up a film on an artist a landscape painter who's facing up to the challenge that is the nightmare of all artists, which is losing their eyesight. And that's been an incredible insight for me to watch the artist James Morrison go through that. But I think as far as the different genre is concerned, then as I say, I think there is certainly a drama to be made on the Trump story. It's something that I've grappled with over the years, and we've certainly pursued. So it's one that I think that would be something that would certainly interest me. And I think the other things I'm working on are things like a series on plastic waste, which is something which is affecting us all, a greater environmental scourge for our planet. And so being able to pursue more environmentally themed films and possibly a series as well, rather than just a one-off film. Because I think what I learned in doing the Flint documentary is that it's such a complex story that sometimes a 2-hour format isn't always the best, or a 90-minute format isn't always the best for a story. And I think for that film, it should have been a series. And I think, it'd be great to be able to make a film or a series of films rather than one-off.
Right. And who inspires you the most in the industry? And also another question that's just been thrown in the last couple of, well, not the last couple of minutes, a couple of minutes before the interview. Have you got any advice for people who are looking to pursue a career within directing or producing or within journalism in general?
Yeah, I think anybody wanting to pursue a career in journalism, I would say just go for it. It's a challenging time to go into journalism because local newspapers, as you know, have all just about closed down everywhere. And there are fewer jobs, and there are more media courses and more people doing those courses. So I think it's important to really follow a story that interests you, that you feel you could be committed to. If you're interested in, say, making a film, find something locally that you're really compelled by, and just go out with mobile phone and start to film it, because you don't need the best technology or the best cameras or any of that stuff really to get a story together, and to take it step by step. And then I think it's a case of really just following your heart and following your own judgment about the film you want to make, rather than trying to make something that other people tell you you should be making. I think as far as filmmakers I admire, is people like Steve James in the United States. I think is a terrific filmmaker. I've always admired his work incredibly. And he also has a huge track record from Who Dreams to Life Itself, to America to Me. He's an incredible filmmaker. And Michael Moore I'm sometimes compared to, but we're very different in the sense that, obviously he's hugely well known. I'm just made a few films, but he's an incredible talent, and somebody I do think is a force for good in the world, whatever you think of his political standpoint. I think he's made some absolutely incredible films, and it's also cracked that nut that is so difficult, I think, for filmmakers, which is to make feature documentaries that fly at the box office. I mean, obviously cinemas everywhere are struggling right now because of coronavirus, but prior to that, he was probably the only filmmaker in the world who could make a documentary and fill a cinema on a routine basis and get people to buy tickets for those films. So that is an amazing amazing legacy, and it's also an inspiration for other people as well to follow in his footsteps, I think.
Okay, great. I've now run out of questions, so that's it. That's it.
I should say as well, Jeannie Finley as well. She's amazing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she's great. She's wonderful. So yeah, that's a few of the people I admire anyway.
Okay, cool. I watch a lot of Louis Theroux. He's quite good. I've watched a lot of his stuff. Recently, I watched his documentary with the Tiger King. So that was quite insightful, but it took me ages to watch that on Netflix because I felt like it was a bit dragging. But I'm one of those people where I lose interest after a few episodes if it's not if it isn't gripping enough. It doesn't. It takes me ages to get through it. So
fair enough. I think we're all a bit like that, really, aren't we?
Yeah, definitely. Especially at the moment with things going on. It's just now that I'm getting back to work, I'm finding more interested in stuff that I'm watching. Whereas when I was in lockdown, I was like, oh, another day, another watch.
Yeah.
So it just got boring. It was fine at the beginning, and then it just it was the same thing every day, like different days, same thing. So yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this. Thanks very much for watching it and for asking the questions too.
No, that's fine. I watched it yesterday, so it was because I was planning to watch it a few days ago, and then things ended up happening elsewhere, and then I had to sort my car out, and it just got pushed back. So yesterday I was like, I've got to watch this before the interview, so I watched it and then did some research while I was at work this morning, following up from yesterday. So that's why it's all fresh in my head, because I'm one of those people where I do a lot of research, but it stays in my mind, but I have to kind of refresh my mind to kind of bring it back to the surface again. So
I know the feeling. Well, that was great, though. No, thanks very much for doing that and for watching.
It's fine. I look forward to watching your new documentary that will be coming out soon. So I think I've seen you've got that Hollywood actor into it. I've forgotten his name.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
What was he like to work with?
Oh, he's great, actually. He was good support to that. He's the narrator, and also he makes a fleeting appearance at the end. But no, he's been terrifically supportive, I must say. So
that's good.
You never know with these things, because he contacted me first after seeing You've Been Trumped, and that's how I got to know him. And it's hard with these films. You have to. It's helpful to have allies who will help you, and he's certainly been helpful. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's all good then. Right, I'm no longer like on edge now because I've done all my questions.
Okay, great. All right. Well, look, thanks so much. Thank you so much for doing it.
That's all right. It's my first time doing it as well, so it's
great. Great. Thanks so much.
That's all right. Hopefully, I'll be able to get into the industry, because one of my dream is to actually work within the entertainment, not like in film or anything, but like working as an interviewer or like an entertainment editor. So I only realised that a couple of years ago and decided to pursue it. So that's what I'm trying to do. So hopefully, but I've got no degree, so I have to start from the bottom, really. But
don't let that get in the way, because I haven't got a degree either, so it doesn't matter.
Really? Does it not matter if you don't have a degree then?
No. It doesn't.
Okay, that's good.
You know, I mean, I think it's you know, you just basically just have to follow what you want to do, and no, I think you're doing the right thing, definitely.
Because I've got a few friends within the industry who are quite like well known, not well known, but they're somewhat known, and they've given me advice, and they've said it's not what you know, it's who you know to get in the industry, and they've basically told me to try and get my name around as much as possible, get as much communication and as much names as possible to kind of get further, because a degree is all right to be behind you, but it's about your experiences and what you know more than your knowledge that you've gained. So
no, I think that's right. That's right. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing it. I really appreciate it.
Right. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, whatever you get up to.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for watching The Fan Carpet. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram for more content next time.
Or even my answers will be cut short and will be highly inaccurate. That's why I have a camera watching us, because I want that for, obviously, for certain reasons.
Mr. Trump, Molly is without any water at all. That's 5 years after your workers cut off her supply.
I'm here on the largest of the Balearic Islands, Mallorca, with the turquoise waters of the Mediterranean Sea, beautiful mountainous landscape, the thriving city of Palma, quaint little market towns, a growing number of luxury hotels. It's no surprise that the likes of Audrey Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor like to holiday here. So come and join me as I take you round Mallorca.
Thank you for watching The Fan Carpet. If you like this video, be sure to click that thumbs up button at the bottom of your screen. And also be sure to subscribe to the Fan Carpet YouTube channels. They're absolutely free and so much fun too. Be sure to check out the official website, thefancarpet.com. Also, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to stay up to date with reviews, competitions, the latest news, and so much more.